Binks. You know how we love speaking to Dr. Dan O Neill from the Royal Vet College on all the research that goes on as part of VetCompass. Well, that's why we're jumping on Zoom now to talk to Dr. Dan about the latest research project, which quite surprisingly revealed that the Labradoodles, Cockapoos and Cavapoos are no healthier than their pedigree parts. I'm Anna Webb. Welcome to A Dog's Life. Dr. Dan O Neill, how excited am I that you're back on A Dog's Life?
It's a real pleasure to be back, Anna. This is one of my favorite parts of my job, chatting with you and chatting with the wider public and the listener about anything to do with dogs.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's lovely. Well, you head up the team at the Royal Vet College that's called VetCompass. Is that right?
Yep. Yep. So VetCompass, so we have a couple of research teams that are relevant here at the Royal Veterinary College. We have VetCompass, which I co-lead with Dave Broadbelt and David Church. That collects anonymized clinical records from veterinary practices right across the UK. And we explore those to examine questions about dogs and their health and what breeds they are, how long they live. And then we have a parallel set of work that's called a project called Pandemic Puppies that I work on, and that's led by Rowena Packer. And that's a nationwide survey of thousands and thousands of owners of dogs. So we're using that to explore dogs from the perspective of the owner. And then we're using VetCompass to explore dogs from the perspective of veterinary care. And then we tend to put the two stories together to get a much broader, richer, holistic picture of dogs and their health.
It's amazing. I love all of this because I feel it's so important, particularly at the moment. But the latest news, I guess, to come out was at the end of August when it was revealed, quite shockingly, if you like, or surprisingly, maybe, that designer crossbreeds like your Cavapoo and your Cockapoo, Labradoodle, and so on, the doodles mainly, that they are no healthier, apparently, than their pedigree parts.
Yeah. This is this one of, and the word you used there was shockingly or surprisingly, and that's the bit that keeps me engaged in research and science. I'm a veterinary practitioner. I was in first opinion practice for 20 years, and then I got the bug to try and explore what's happening around us and really get to understand what's happening with dogs. So I left practice and went to the Royal Veterinary College in 2009. Did a master's and then a PhD developing VetCompass. And it's those moments when you get that surprising light bulb discovery, such as we had with the designer dogs story, and it makes you think about why that is. And then you start to get some real insights. And I'm hoping that's what we'll explore more deeply in this podcast as we go through it.
Well, yes, I do hope so, because in 2019, unless I've got this completely wrong, the Royal Vet College noted that designer crossbreeds were healthier in so much as they benefited from what's called hybrid vigor. So the first cross, say, of a poodle mixed with a cocker spaniel was assumed to be healthier than the cocker spaniel and the poodle.
Yeah, there are certain trigger words that as you get deeper and deeper into science, you start to look out for. And you've just said one of them. You've said assumed. And that's what we do all the time. We try to understand the world around us and we make assumptions. And that certainly was an assumption that's been around for 50, 100 years. It does seem to be correct when it comes to plants and when it comes to production species. So lots of sheep and lots of pigs are deliberate crosses between two pre-existing breeds. And those crosses on the very first generation do give you this hybrid vigor, this kind of bounce in resilience that you get in the first generation. But that tends to be for production characteristics. So those animals grow a bit faster. They have better food conversion efficiency. They maybe produce more milk. They maybe produce more fur, more hair, more wool. When it comes to dogs, we're judging them on different criteria. So we're not judging dogs on how fast they grow or how much growth I can get per kilogram of food I put into them. We're judging them on different criteria. So there's always been some doubt about hybrid vigor. So the theory is there. It should work. And that's really what we've been exploring at the Royal Veterinary College in these studies. That paper you referred to, that was exploring the assumption or the possibility of hybrid vigor rather than showing it existed.
That's so interesting because I wonder if that was misconstrued a bit to, stimulate the ongoing surge, in the popularity of these mixes. Might that have been the case, Dr. Dan?
It certainly is part of it, and it's been around. As I say, this view of hybrid vigor has been around for, well, it was Gregor Mendel in the 1850s that came up with his idea of genetics and simple genes. That was kind of accepted around 1900, and then from then on, we've grown more and more and more to believe in the hybrid vigor concept. So essentially, what we've done here is we've started to delve into the designer dogs. That first paper with a student, an undergraduate veterinary student actually called Erin Burnett. That was part of the Pandemic Puppies project. And in that study, we were looking at understanding why people got designer dogs. So it's exactly the question you've just asked, Anna. Why was that? And interestingly, compared to purebred dogs, the big drivers specifically for getting a designer dog over a purebred dog were belief in better health and belief in hypoallergenicity, which we might come back to later, the belief that some of these dogs are less likely to trigger an allergic reaction. And then also some beliefs that these dogs were somehow better as pets, especially being better with children. So these were like the big drivers pushing designer dogs over and above any sort of dog. However, that said, the two biggest drivers for getting a dog in the UK, regardless of whether it's a designer dog or a purebred dog, and we've shown this in Pandemic Puppies Royal Veterinary College research, are that the dog is a good companion and that it's got a body size that's suited to the owner's lifestyle. So some owners might particularly want a small dog. Some might want a larger dog they can take out and exercise more. But those are still the two biggest drivers overall. And then after that, it's the hyperallergenicity, the belief about being good with kids, and the belief in health that's specifically driving designer dogs.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I mean the judge is out with the jury, or the jury's out with the judge on this hypoallergenicity. Because can any dog be really hypoallergenic?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And a lot of this, I love history, Anna, and
Mm.
I think you're into this as well, because I remember you telling me lots of stuff when we first met about the history of dogs. The history of designer dogs kind of tells us why they've ended up where they are today. So the original story was in Australia, and we had somebody called Wally Conran, and he was working with the guide dogs equivalent in Australia, and he was trying to get a guide dog for somebody who was blind, but that person's husband was allergic to dogs. So this was a huge problem with the typical Labrador retrievers that they were using as guide dogs. So he came up with this plan to cross the Labrador retriever with a poodle. And then his theory was that, and this is the assumption, this magic word assumption, he assumed that by crossing the dogs, we could get the bred guide dog approach of the Labrador, but then stop its hair from shedding. Therefore, it would be less allergenic.
Mm.
So he did this cross, rehomed the dog, all went well with the dog, but he was left with the remainder of the litter of puppies. And he couldn't get rid of these puppies because in the common parlance back then, they were mongrels, they were mutts, they were crossbreeds. Nobody wanted them. People wanted purebreds. So as a good marketeer, he came up with a plan and he said, what I will do is remarket these crossbreeds, these mongrels, as being a new breed. So he invented a term, and you might recognize this term. It's called Labradoodle because we still have it all these years later. And he invented this concept, and suddenly he created a thing. And people like to acquire, to own a thing. They don't like to acquire something that isn't a thing. So he just happen to get onto something within human nature, that we want to own something that is a thing, and also something that appears special and better. So basically, he invented Labradoodles, and these things took off. And since then, the concept has spread. And we now have the entire concept of designer dogs, where there are hundreds of different designer dogs out there. Essentially, any pairing of any two or more purebred dogs, you can cross them. And once you mix their two names together to create this new breed, I'm using inverted commas here, you have a new designer breed, and off you go. So essentially, that's the history. Because that history started with Wally Conran trying to invent a hyperallergenic dog, the belief has stayed that not just the Labradoodles are hyperallergenic, but now suddenly every designer dog is hyperallergenic, regardless of what breeds are crossed. And this assumptions that we make as humans. And when we make them, it's really hard to reverse them.
It's so interesting, the story about Wally, because I think he wrote later, Dan, that he kind of regretted what he'd done because he saw what was happening. Because how I see it is that sadly, the designer crosses are perhaps being, bred in awful. They're the dogs that can be churned out in puppy farms or bred unscrupulously because there isn't any regulation or kennel club backing with these dogs. So they're perfect, for the unscrupulous to flood the internet and fulfill the growing demand, where kennel club assured breeders and the like can't, because they're breeding pedigree dogs. So, that's another sort of side issue of this, the animal welfare of these dogs and how they're bred. And of course, how the puppies end up being maybe not that great with children after all.
Yeah, it's you've probably hit on about three or four or five, six
Yeah,
different
I know.
really important points to discuss there. So first of all, yes, these dogs probably you can't say all of them. We'll come back to in a second to what a designer dog is, but certainly the common ones we're talking about probably are easier to keep and are easier to breed from. So therefore, it is easier to produce lots of them. One could argue that that's because they're healthier in some respects than some of the extreme conformation dogs that require cesareans and fertility clinics to get pregnant in the first place. So one could argue where the welfare issues lie there. Do they actually lie with the extreme conformation dogs in the first place? Separate argument. But certainly these dogs are being bred in very large numbers. The public has switched on to wanting them. In the UK, designer dogs, and we can come back to this again later because we have all the data from VetCompass, but designer dogs are hugely popular and are rising dramatically in popularity. So there are lots of welfare issues here in the background. It is so complex. I guess where we should start with is the basic concept of innate health. Innate health describes the baked in physical health associated with any dog. In other words, has that dog got the basic bits that a dog should have? Has it got a nose it can breathe through? Has it got a spine that can bend? Has it got a tail that can wag? Has it got flat skin rather than folded skin that gets all infected and painful? Has it got eyes that sit back in its skull rather than bulging out, where the animal can't blink fully and they tend to get eye ulcers? So lots of these extreme conformations that we have normalized in dogs, we don't get them in some of the really common designers, nor do we get them in some of the really popular typical dog breeds, either like Labradors or Jack Russell Terriers. So there is this basic innate health issue that we do need to think about when we're thinking about dog welfare. And then we have human imposed welfare issues. So mass production of dogs that are kept in cages in Eastern Europe or Wales or wherever. And that basically we're just farming puppies as a product to sell. So it's complex, Anna. It's really complex. And certainly we can't blame designer dogs per se, the concept, for causing lots of those issues. But there are some intrinsic links in there.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, it's down to the people, unfortunately, that are looking to make a quick buck or, and farm these dogs. So, no, of course, it's not the individual dog's fault at all. But, these dogs can, if they're bred in, poor circumstances, be disappointing, if you like, to their future homes, as they might be nervous. They're they might be bitey, they might be sick, you know, because they've been bred in their own urine for weeks, you know, their cages haven't been cleaned, they could be undernourished, and they might even die. So there's all of that, which is a big separate issue that I think, you know, long term, I wish government would do something about it and try and really crack down on importing these dogs, smuggling them in, because mostly they are. But, you know, if health, we're talking about innate health, and I agree, dogs should be able to run. They should have tails. They need to communicate as dogs, and dogs should have tails, for example, because they feature as a major part of dog to dog communication and communication with people. Isn't that right?
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. That whole innate health concept, that's a concept I invented at RVC and have named, and that's now caught on in the UK, where it's a major part of the brachycephalic, the flat-faced dog working group, and it's also forming the basis of a current planned government legislation, where there will be a requirement for dogs to have those bits that a dog should have. Currently, sadly, lots of dogs don't have those bits, and that's a real welfare issue. So the whole innate health concept, that's where dog breeding and dog acquisition is going. And that's where we want your reader to start and your listener out there to start to think about dogs in terms of a dog being a dog. In other words, being able to do everything we expect a dog to be able to do, as opposed to a dog being part of a dog. In other words, only able to do certain things, and that we can't allow it to run up the stairs because its short little legs might mean its disc goes, or we can't take it out on a warm day because its flat face means that it can't breathe and it'll develop heat stroke. So these are important issues, and they are tied up with the whole designer dog phenomenon. It
Yeah.
probably is worthwhile, actually, even going back to basics here, Anna, and just thinking about designer dogs and what that concept means. Because often when we put a large name on something, we're visualizing something very specific. So a lot of people, when we say designer dogs, might visualize a cockapoo because there are so many of them out there. But designer dog is just a concept, and the concept is essentially that we are deliberately crossing some currently existing types of dogs, so that might be two different breeds, to create a new type of dog, right? And historically, there were always lots of crossbreeds out there. There were generally accidental crosses, often between two purebreds or maybe a purebred and a crossbred, and we just call them mongrels. But the designer dog is different in that there is intent to create that cross. And then when the puppy is sold to the new owner, it is sold as this new entity, whether it's a cockapoo or a cavapoo or whatever cross we want to make it, right? And that's really what a designer dog is. It is a broad concept. Now, on the one hand, that is no different, absolutely no different to how we created the current pedigree dogs we have. So 100, 150 years ago, we invented breed in dogs. Before that, it didn't really exist. There were types of dogs, but nobody had defined a dog specifically on a piece of paper that it had to look like X, Y, and Z. That was only invented in the late 1850s by mankind purely to allow us to show dogs because people got into showing and you could make lots of money from it and it was good for your reputation. And if you were wealthy, it was a hobby. So this was purely an invention by mankind to suit our purposes. And really, in a way, we invented those original dogs by crossing different types of dogs to create this new type of animal. And then we would give it a description. It's called a breed standard. And then we would recognize it as a breed. And in essence, that's all we're doing now with designer dogs. We are creating a whole new raft of breeds. And over time, these new designers are becoming breeds: Cavapoos, Cockapoos, Labradoodles. They're all being recognized by the public as breeds. And in essence, there's nothing new here, folks. This is just the same as we did before. We're just reinventing the wheel, creating a whole new raft of breeds. And we just call them designer breeds. But in 5, 10 years' time, we will just call them breeds. They'll no longer be designers.
Mm. It is so interesting, and it is the evolution, I guess, of the dog. But in the research that you did, you know, highlighting this the surprise maybe that these designers weren't healthier despite hybrid vigor than their pedigree counterparts. How do you think that's left the designer crossbreeds in terms of innate health? I know many of them do have a nose. You know, the Cockapoos, poodles have good noses, so do Cocker Spaniels and Labradors. So arguably their conformation is better, but they do have their own care prerequisites, really, not least grooming. I know a lot of groomers that sometimes have to deal with cockapoos and they have to be completely shaved because their owners haven't kept up their coats and they get into a terrible mess, and that can be very painful for the dog, of course, and then they have to be completely shaved and begin again. So there's aspects, I suppose, where I'm going here, it's kind of, husbandry, looking after dogs properly. I think perhaps back a few years we got it right. There was less services available. Dog walkers didn't exist. Doggy daycare hadn't been invented, and grooming parlors, they're two a penny now. We've got two on my local drag just up the road on the Chatsworth Road now, two grooming salons, which again I think have sprung up because of the designer crossbreeds, because of their need for regular grooming. Did the research really, I think the word surprise is a good word, did the research you did surprise you in that the Cockapoo was no healthier than a poodle or a Cocker Spaniel?
That's a really great question. Again, you've hit on so many bits there, Anna. The bit about husbandry, we'll come back to that in a second, because you're almost a mind reader on that one, because that's the next bit that's coming. That's the next part of the study. So this particular study was a master's project led by Rowena Packer and myself at the Royal Veterinary College. We had a most wonderful student called Gina Bryson, and Gina did a survey with over 9,000 dog owners, feeding her in information about every aspect of their dogs. In her study, we were specifically looking at three types of designer crosses. So the first thing we have to do is stop our brain from assuming that these results describe all designer crosses. They do not, and I'll come back to in a minute why that is not the case. So we specifically picked three. Based on VetCompass information, we picked the three commonest designer crosses in the UK. So that's the Cockapoo, the Cavapoo, and the Labradoodle. So those are by far and away the three most common. And then we asked owners of those dogs and then owners of the parent breed. So each of those, the Cavalier, the Poodles, and the Labradors, and the Cocker Spaniels, we got them to feed in so that we could compare between the designers and their parent breeds. And this is the wonderful bit about science. If I was asked to predict before the study what we would find, I would have predicted that the designer dogs were more healthy, on the basis that we would have assumed, that wonderful word, that there was some hybrid vigor effect. So that would have been the prior prediction. In science, we call that a hypothesis. It's a prior belief or statement, and then you test it with the data. Interestingly, when before we did the study, when I presented the theory to lots of different purebred or pedigree dog breeders, they all predicted, they knew that the designers would be much sicker. When I presented this to the wider public, to owners and also to vets, they all predicted that the designers would be much healthier. And that's the danger of us going with our own belief systems and assuming our beliefs are true. We always see the world through our own lens. Whereas with data, big data that's robust, we move outside of our own biases and we move into the real world. We start to see the world as it truly is, not as we see it through our lenses. So within this study, with over 9,000 dogs, we compared the health across the most common disorders in all the dogs. So we had 57, long list of common disorders. And by and large, there was no real difference. 87% of the disorders had absolutely no difference. 6 or 7% were higher in designers, 6 or 7% were lower in designers. So there's always typical variation, but basically no overall difference. Now, you can interpret that, Anna, the way you have said, and that's to say that the designers were no better, but you could also say they were no worse. I had predicted in advance the designers would be healthier, so I was wrong, and I love it when I'm wrong. Absolutely love it. Every time that you're wrong, you learn something. You come out of it realizing I had a bias. I was looking through my lens. The real world is different to where I thought it was. Um, and then you start to unpick it. And when we started to unpick this, we started to see that there's maybe just two or three big reasons for health issues beyond typical aging issues in dogs. And those are the extreme conformation. So that means extreme body shapes. Those, and the second one is inbreeding. So issues related to extreme mothers bred back to their sons. Basically, what's very common or was very common in a lot of pedigree dogs, less so these days. And when we looked at these three designer breeds we had, the Cavapoo, the Cockapoo, and the Labradoodle, none of their parents really could be considered an extreme breed. Therefore, when you cross them, you're getting an animal that also isn't an extreme breed. So you're not really gaining, nor are you losing anything on health from an extreme conformation point of view.
Mm.
And then when we looked at the parents, lots of those parents were just purebred dogs. They weren't necessarily kennel club or pedigree registered dogs, so they probably weren't heavily inbred. And when we asked, lots and lots of the designer dogs that we had were second and third and even fourth generation. So their parents, if I have a Labradoodle, the parents were both Labradoodles and the grandparents were Labradoodles. So therefore, any hybrid vigor effect is gone, long gone in those
Mm.
dogs. So in essence, we're gaining nothing by reducing inbreeding, and we're gaining nothing by reducing extreme conformation. Therefore, why would we expect there to be any health difference? These three types of designer dogs that we have are just dogs. They have all the bits that you would expect on a dog. They're not heavily inbred, just like the parents. And therefore, when you start looking at it like that, you think, oh, okay, actually, it makes sense that there's no difference between them in health.
It's so interesting. But if health is based on being 50% nurture, so the genes you inherit, and 50%, no, sorry, 50% nature, the genes that you inherit, and then 50% nurture, and the effect of the environment on your genetic makeup, then surely, health is a bit more in our control than maybe we think.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there's a bunch of things there. First of all, the nature nurture thing, that's a wonderful conceptual thing. It's a bit like hybrid vigor, but it's so complex you can't break it down into percentages. And we just, as humans, we like what we call a binary world. We like splitting things in two. And we say 50-50. But the reality is there are within VetCompass in a typical study of any breed, I will get 400, 500, 600 different disorders recorded. Some of those disorders are heavily environmental, like cut pads. Some of them are infectious, kennel cough, parvovirus. And then some of them are heavily inherited. So maybe things like epilepsy. So this 50-50 nature nurture, it's a nice thing and it's an easy way to view the world, but actually the world is much more complex than that. What we can say is that lots and lots and lots of the disorders that we get in dogs are complex genetics. So the common disorders in dogs are obesity, osteoarthritis, psoriasis, otitis externa, periodontal disease. These are the common disorders, and those are heavily related to how we care for the dogs. And certainly, whether somebody has a Cockapoo these days or they have the Cocker Spaniel, the nurture, the care they give to that dog is likely to be no different these days. So in a way, the nurture bit probably doesn't really give an advantage to one or other type of dog. And because the physical shape of the dog is not extreme, the nature, the genetic bit doesn't particularly give an advantage to one or other dog. So hence, again, it's not surprising that actually in these three designer crosses, the health doesn't differ that much. It's basically the parents are a dog, as in they have all the bits a dog should have, and if they have a good owner, they will have good nurture. And the crossbreed is a dog, and hopefully has a good owner that gives a good nurture.
Yes, no, absolutely, absolutely. But it is a mix, isn't it? in keeping your dog well, I think, and giving them the exercise they need, keeping their weight slim, and all of these things, which are essential in humans, let's face it as well. But on this hypoallergenic aspect, because that's something, that comes up a lot when I'm talking to people about suggesting a puppy for their experience, their lifestyle, and their accommodation, which are the three main factors I think that's so important. And I think a lot of people forget that. There's no point having a Great Dane on the top floor of a high-rise block, because what happens when the lift isn't working? And of course, doing stairs, lots of stairs every day for a big dog like a Great Dane is sure to mess up their musculoskeletal condition from time to time. Stairs aren't great for lots of dog breeds, not only Daxies. My point there is this. I suppose, you said about the marketing earlier, but this hypoallergenic, what is going on here? I mean, is the poodle even totally hypoallergenic?
So really good question. Just to go back to your comment on stairs, stairs shouldn't be a problem for a dog. A dog is a dog. It's a highly energetic animal. It's got 4 legs, better balanced than we have. So really what you're talking about is extreme conformation. Again, you mentioned Great Danes, extreme giant dog, Dachshunds, with their dwarf little legs, and then their tendency to disc problems. So again, it isn't the stairs that's the problem. It's the fact that we have created dogs with extreme conformation. And we don't need a Great Dane to be so terribly big. And we don't need a Dachshund to have such terribly small legs. We can have Dachshunds that have normal length legs, typical dog legs, and they're still going to be lovely little dogs. So I digress, but it's not the stairs, it's the dog and our choice of dogs. And I mean our choice as humanity for what sort of dogs we're creating. Really good question on the hyperallergenic thing, right? So essentially, humans can be allergic to anything. And a lot of the time it's allergies, even to things like saliva, where dogs might lick themselves and then the saliva dries on their hair. It's often allergies to dog dander. So that might be the little pieces of skin that shed off naturally from every dog's skin. So you will get that even on dogs that don't shed, like poodles. So you absolutely cannot say that any dog is truly non-allergenic, that, you're guaranteed not to have an allergic reaction. So that's the first thing. You mentioned earlier about husbandry, right? In Gina's study, and Gina's outstanding. She's now, passed her master's and is now working in research at the RVC. But Gina has 2 further studies that she's preparing at the moment. The first one is looking at the behavior of these 3 designer crosses, and behavioral issues. You mentioned it earlier, Anna, are huge. They are hugely linked with nurture as well. As you said, puppies being bred, produced in farmed conditions, often outside the country, and they have a really bad start in life, and that can lead to problems later on. And also there is a degree of nurture and nature in that, so a degree of genetics where some of the parent breeds, like the Cocker Spaniel bit, maybe we get these puppies thinking, the crossbreeds thinking they're cute, fluffy little things that will just sit all day in our house. And actually, they've got Cocker Spaniel genes in them that want to go out and run and play. So often it's a mismatch between our expectations for this little teddy bear, little puppy, and the reality of having a dog that actually is a dog and wants to exercise. So that paper is coming. And then the other paper that's coming is husbandry, which is the other point you mentioned, Anna, earlier, and it's absolutely key. The owners often buy the designers based on looking at the world from the point of view that these dogs don't shed. And they don't shed, A, if we believe it, gives us the idea that they're hypoallergenic. But B, it means I don't have dog hairs all over my house, right? And that's wonderful. But you do forget that these dogs' hair still grows. It's just, it doesn't shed. So as you say, these dogs need to be groomed. And the huge rising popularity of these dogs does mean that more and more and more grooming parlors are cropping up. That's just the nature of how the world works. Services develop to meet a need. But that can be very expensive. So it might be £60 to have your dog groomed every 6 weeks. So that could be another £500 a year in the middle of a cost of living crisis that people forget when they're making their decisions about which types of dogs to get. And certainly in the upcoming paper, we're looking at the financial issues, but also some of the health issues, exactly as you've said, where some of these dogs may not be groomed often enough, and then we end up with skin problems. So it is complex, the whole picture. Often as humans, we're looking for simple answers. We're looking for again the binary. Designers are good or bad, or healthy or not healthy. It's much more complex than that. All you can say with these three designer dogs, the three that we've looked at, the Cavapoos, Cockapoos, and Labradoodles, is you are at least starting with a dog who is a dog in terms of its physical capacity to be a dog. And that's a really good place to start.
Yes, yes, I don't dispute that, Dan, at all. I'm a great one for dogs being able to move and breathe and enable you to have lots of fun with them. I'm of that type that likes to be out training your dog. I love training dogs. I think it's brilliant and encouraging owners to get with the program as well a bit, and push boundaries and that is the thing I see a lot with the Cockapoo, for example, is that the pet parents, the owners, are kind of oblivious that they have a highly tuned gun dog in their home, not a fluffy teddy bear. I think that's kind of it's a big thing. But even with something like a Maltipoo, they're cheeky, across between a poodle and a Maltese Terrier. Well, you've got a very bright, eager to learn individual there that again needs a lot of work. And I think it boils down to me that's the commitment aspect of dog ownership. It is every day, it is spending time, proactive time with your dog, not just getting a dog walker to do the walking. I don't want to walk my dog today. It's raining. I know I'll bring my dog walker and they'll do an hour around the block or whatever. That's the bit that frustrates me a lot actually at the moment, mainly because maybe I feel jealous other people are happy to let their dogs be walked by people. I can't do that. I'm too much of a control freak, because I don't want any bad habits to be taught to my dogs. I don't want my dogs pulling on the lead, and things like that. So I am a bit of a control freak. I like to know exactly where my dogs are, where they've been, at any moment, in case of any disaster happening.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And increasingly, we're starting to see, and we're starting to do this within the Royal Veterinary College research. The bond between owners and the dogs changing. More, you said the word pet parent, but more and more people seeing their dogs as part of their family. And a lot of people, when they go on holidays, won't even put their dogs into kennels because that's not suitable for their child, their dog child. They will have the dog in somebody else's house or somebody come and stay with them in their house. So it is complex. The whole thing is complex. One of the key issues going back to these three specific designer dogs is popularity. And part of the work that we're doing at the Royal Veterinary College within VetCompass, so the veterinary clinical record side, is looking at demography. So demography is demo means the population and graphy means a picture of. So demography is getting a picture of the wider population. In 2019, so 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I published a paper looking at the most popular dogs in the UK. And certainly the Cavapoo, Cockapoo, and Labradoodle were in that list. But when I went and looked at the same data from last year, the numbers have changed hugely. So Cavapoos in 2019 were 0.6%. So that's less than 1 in 100. It's like 1 in 200. They've doubled, so they're up now to 1.2%. So that's 1 in 100 of all dogs in the UK is a Cavapoo. The Cockapoo is the one that really has taken off. In 2019, it was already hugely popular. It was 3.3%, so that's 1 in 30. But by 2023, so last year, it was 5%. So that's 1 in 20 of every single dog in the UK is a Cockapoo. And that's huge. So we have that most common breed in the UK is a Labrador Retriever. And the Labrador Retriever is 6%, whereas the Cockapoo is 5%. So Cockapoos have come from nowhere to become the second most common type of dog in the UK. And unfortunately, despite all the advice from all the different welfare organizations and the strapline to the wider public to stop and think before buying a flat-faced dog. The other big riser in popularity still is the French Bulldog. And that rose from 3% in 2019 to 4% in 2023. So the French Bulldog is still rising, despite all the health issues associated with the extreme conformation you get in many of those dogs. So
Gosh, yeah.
demography tells us quite a bit. Demography tells us what's coming down the line. And what's coming down the line is that the face of dogs in the UK is changing. And the traditional types of dogs, Jack Russells, Staffordshire Bull Terriers, and West Highland White Terriers, they are all dropping in popularity and dropping quite dramatically. And they're being replaced by designer dogs, so Cavapoos and Cockapoos particularly, and being replaced by French Bulldogs. So the world is changing. And in a way, part of what we're doing at the Royal Veterinary College is trying to understand that world and at least then be able to help owners to make the most responsible choice when they're choosing which sort of dog to get.
Gosh, the demography sounds amazing. I can't wait for these studies to come out because that means we'll be chatting again. But a question for you. So, as part of this demography, I hope I'm saying that right, do you look at the age of the human? Because I do think that dog ownership has got younger and younger. I mean, when I was growing up, it was always, oh, I'll have a dog when I retire, and that was generally the way you did it because there were no dog-friendly offices back then. I mean, this is a very recent development. And do you think developments like that? So the big tech firms welcome dogs, loads of, you can take your dog with you to work more and more. In fact, it's being encouraged because dogs are productive for you in the workplace for loads and loads of reasons. We won't go into all that now, but they de-stress you, they make you smile, they encourage interaction and productivity in the workspace, all these great things that dogs just do naturally, Dr. Dan, isn't it? We're kind of harnessing them. Maybe it's a plan, to help people work harder, bring a dog into the office. There's that thing that the demographic of dog owners is definitely getting younger. And do you think that's a reflection on the type of dogs that they're getting?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It's really complex, the whole thing, and what's driving it. It's in the UK when we're collecting data, it is relatively straightforward. It's still complicated to do, but relatively straightforward to collect data on dogs. Dogs are not covered by GDPR and the Data Protection Act. Your question about owners, that then becomes a little bit more challenging because anything that where you're collecting data on owners is covered by Data Protection Act. So you have to expect and require owners to opt in. Now, we do a lot of surveys at the Royal Veterinary College. Rowena Packer leads on these within the Pandemic Puppies project. And we have lots and lots of owners, thousands of owners feeding in data. But those data we know are biased. Certain people are more likely to reply. And generally, we have about 80, 85, 90% of all those surveys are female, for example. Now, I know full well in the wider world, 80 to 90% of people are not female. It's roughly 50-50. So we know that the data we have on owners in our surveys isn't totally representative because certain types of people reply. So that's the background. That then said, the evidence does show that lots of these dogs are being acquired by younger people, and they are being acquired maybe earlier in life before people start, having a human family. And dogs, as you say, Anna, give so much to us. They give so much in terms of companionship. Certainly, going through the pandemic, there was almost a parallel epidemic of mental health issues in adults, but also in children, young children, and young children are still struggling from it. And dogs were seen as hugely beneficial, and there's a lot of evidence to say they were. So it is complex. The drivers have changed. I would make a comment that there is some wider issues that are driving the increase in designer dogs, and part of that, I suspect, is a pushback against pedigree dogs. This kind of has been going on for about 15 or 20 years, and there is constant media messaging and messaging from researchers about the health issues related to pedigree, specifically pedigree, as opposed to purebred. And that's related to so many of those dogs having extreme conformation that some breeds are changing, but a lot aren't. And they're remaining extreme because the public like extreme. They like dogs with no tails. They like dogs that are snorting when they walk. They like dogs that struggle to sleep because they can't breathe. Humans find this funny. We like dogs that have skin folds. We think it's really cute. We like dogs with bulgy eyes because it makes them look like babies. So it is very hard to change human nature to realize that actually, when cute is associated with suffering, maybe we should just call it suffering and no longer call it cute. And cute should be the dog that looks like a dog. So the really cute little Labrador puppy, or the really cute little Jack Russell puppy, or Staffordshire Bull Terrier puppy, or Yorkshire Terrier puppy. So a dog that's kind of a dog. And the general public seem to have switched on to this message, and their solution to it, instead of just switching from an extreme body shape pedigree dog, purebred dog, to a non-extreme, their solution is to move to one of these hybrids where they deem that these dogs are much healthier, that they're not pedigree. Therefore, that must be a good thing. So there is this driver in the background that's pushing, and part of that is collectively our responsibility. So that means humanity, but it also means the veterinary profession, the charities, the kennel clubs, the breed clubs, for not actually stepping up and dealing properly and decisively with the issue of extreme conformation and with the issues of inbreeding. And these actually are putting the whole pedigree dog project at risk. Because unless we deal with them, and they are huge issues, unless we deal with them, it may well be that the world just moves to hybrids as being the norm, and pedigree dogs, pure breeds, as being the unusual.
Gosh, I, I, I can't bear the thought of that. I've got to be honest. And I do believe that there's a greater awareness amongst responsible breeders. I mean, dog breeders, there's good ones, there's bad ones, there's really awful ones, and there's supremely amazing ones. Of course, in all walks of life, you have all of that, no matter what profession you're in. There's lots of testing now for genetic diversity. I mean, my own miniature bull terrier, her diversity score is 0.5. So she is completely outbred. It didn't make her a lovely, beautiful personality, though. She's hard work. She has noise sensitivity and she arrived with touch sensitivity. So there's a whole raft of issues that you can try and sort out, and again with these hybrid dogs. But then there's issues of, as I said, noise sensitivity, which affects over half of Britain's dogs. That can be a very difficult behavior if you don't recognize it and don't know how to counter condition against certain noises. But that can make a dog not a great family pet, for example. Similarly, if a dog doesn't like to be touched, which many dogs don't, that could be a problem in a family situation. Of course, often if you rehome a dog from an animal welfare charity, you get the dog assessed. So I'm a great one for rehoming. We're in an abandonment crisis, and I do believe cockapoos are high on that list, actually, that rescues are really full of a lot of cockapoos that aren't wanted anymore, for example. So clearly these hybrids do also have issues, and could be to do with the cost of living crisis and all sorts of things. But we are living in a welfare crisis for dogs at the moment. Rescues are beyond full. They're totally full up. There's a lot of misconceptions. I know I've got my bias going on. I love that because I've studied psychology, obviously, and it reminds me of all the psychology studies that you do. And bias comes into everything everybody does, everything everybody says. So it's so interesting to have these bigger picture studies being done, that can balance it all. But I do believe a lot of work is going on in the pedigree field to make them not have this stigma, I suppose, of being sickly. I agree with you completely, Dr. Dan, on the French Bulldog front. 100%. But of course, there are over 200 other pedigree breeds that aren't French Bulldogs that have very good conformation, like my little toy terrier. I mean, he's perfect. Long legs, long nose, very curvy, agile back. But I mean, he's facing extinction because nobody knows that an English toy terrier even exists. And that pains me because they're They're great little dogs. You don't even have to take them to the groomers. They have got a very thin coat. Mr. Binks, actually, I will admit this, he's never actually had a bath because I don't believe in bathing dogs too much, actually. He's never had a bath and he's nearly 13, but he's not smelly or anything, but his coat just naturally stays clean. It's an interesting one. And I just think the vista of dogs, if they all look the same, be really boring. But maybe this is where we're going. Maybe this is where we're going.
Yeah, interesting. But again, you can see the complexity of all of this, Anna. So many of those problems are just dog problems, noise sensitivity, part of nature, part of nurture, how those dogs are reared. Sometimes it's just bad luck. It's not that anybody's done anything bad. Yeah, your comment about the different breeds is absolutely correct. And this is part of the reason why I do all the work I do. There are a limited number of breeds that are severely challenged because of extreme body shape, extreme conformation. Those limited number of breeds run the risk of dragging all dogs down. Just as I said earlier, when people talk about designer dogs, they think about cockapoos and they assume whatever applies to cockapoos applies to every designer dog. It doesn't work like that. Each designer breed is its own breed. Similarly, with the purebred breeds, there are so many of those breeds that are physically perfect. They have wonderful innate health. Humans like variety. We will never go back. It's not in our nature to go back to having just one type of dog, the street dog, the domestic dog. If you just leave it, it will always revert back to the street type dog. Humans will never go for that. It doesn't matter. You look around you, people all have different cars, they have different clothes, they have different glasses. Every year we want the latest fashion. It's what we do as humans. We want to have something that is unique, that is recognizable. So we will always have breeds. It's just if we don't take control of the current issues with extreme conformation in dogs and in breeding, we will end up with a whole new face of dogs in the UK. And that new face will be the new range of designer dogs that aren't tainted with the old messages about the unhealthiness of the previous pedigree dogs. It's like when the government changes and you get the new government coming in and suddenly it's clean and fresh, even though in the background everything else is pretty much the same. It's going to be the same civil servants. That's what's going to happen in the UK. We will have a whole new government, I'm using inverted commas, with new breeds, with a new governing structure, but they will just be breeds. They're just different to the ones that were there before. And in essence, that's what's happening with designer dogs. We're reinventing breeds. Maybe this time around, we will learn from the previous mistakes and we won't allow extreme conformations in these designer dogs. But who knows? We're humans, we're fallible. We may end up with the same issues. But there is no reason on earth why the current pedigree dog project can't be rescued. There are so many of those breeds. The Kennel Club registers, I think it's 223 breeds. The International Kennel Club FCI registers, I think it's 350 breeds. Within VetCompass in the UK, there are 1,200 breeds. I'm counting all the different designer type crosses as breeds because they are. People buy them as a breed. That just shows our demand for variation. And purebred dogs bring so many advantages. When we get a puppy, if we're buying a Jack Russell puppy versus a Labrador, we can kind of predict how big they're going to get. That means we can predict how much space we need, how much exercise we need to give them, how much they're likely to cost to feed, to give veterinary care to. So there are just so many benefits from owning purebred dogs. The stickiness, as in our human nature and our tendency to not want to change, our stickiness to the desire to own extreme conformations means that anyone who continues to promote and support and advertise dogs with extreme conformation really are risking sounding the death knell for the entire pedigree dog project. And that's really where all this designer thing has come from. If there was no issues with the dogs that we already had, we wouldn't need to be inventing new dog breeds. But the fact that we are inventing new dog breeds tells us that we're doing something wrong with the ones that exist already.
Yes, yes, I don't disagree. And I say extreme conformation, miniature Daxies, for example, they upset me sometimes when I see them. And a friend of mine lost their mini Daxie to IVDD just 2 weeks ago. as it wasn't fair. A lot of people had broken hearts on that one, you know. So it's not fair on the dogs or the humans. But yeah, goes back though to, you know, the darker side where I just do think these a lot of designer crossbreeds are being churned out to fulfill a demand. And oftentimes, you know, these are the dogs that will end up in rescue but that's the human's fault again. They haven't thought it through, don't understand what a dog is, the massive commitment that is hopefully for 15 years. You know, it's not just for the weekend, it's every single day. You know, a dog is a family member. And I think that's the bit that I'm really interested to find out more about in your demography research paper. Definitely, Dr. Dan.
Exactly, exactly. And in a way, if we're on a journey in this podcast, if you end up with that final message, Anna, that a dog is a member of your family, it is a commitment for 15 years. But actually, if it's true love, you don't see that as a commitment. You see that as a gift for 15 years. And when you get to the end, I've done several studies of euthanasia, and obviously I was in practice for 2 decades. That final visit when you have to say goodbye to your animal is the most painful, the most heart-wrenching moment in most people's lives. And that's part of the drive for the work I'm doing at the Royal Veterinary College on innate health. Because if we start with dogs that are innately healthy, then they are likely to live longer. And while they're alive, that part of their life is likely to be much healthier. People call it the health span part of your life when you're healthy. Then inevitably, most of us have a final bit of life where our health is fading. But it's the decisions are all about humans. We have invented these breeds. We're the ones that decide which ones are the most popular. Cavapoos, Cockapoos, they didn't really exist 10 years ago. Now they're top of the pops. In another 10 years, it may be something else that's top breed. These are all human issues, but it's up to us as humans to do the right thing. And certainly podcasts like this, where we explore these issues, I think hopefully start a wider public conversation about doing the right thing for dogs. And ultimately, if we do the right thing for dogs, we're doing the right thing for ourselves as humans, because the healthier dog means that we will have more fun with our dog. We will have our dog for longer. They will cost less on veterinary care.
Mm.
So, you know, it's kind of this paradox where doing the right thing actually means we get a much better outcome, but yet still so many people make poor decisions.
Yes, yes, I think, you know, but that's again human nature. I think being, you know, led by celebrity endorsements and social media rather than spending time with dogs and thinking, you know, is this really a breed? Is a cockapoo for me? You know, it's going to need 2 hours exercise, you know, when it's young every single day. Can I fulfill that commitment, you know, to do the right thing by my dog? I mean, it's something I think of every day, Dr. Dan. You know, have my dogs had a good day today? And if I think they haven't, then, you know, I really, really guilt out. We've had 2 short walks today, all of us, because of the rain. So we're going to go for a third walk shortly after this recording, you know, so long as the rain holds off. Then I'll feel that's been a good day. But at the moment, I'm thinking, no, their exercise hasn't been that great, actually. I haven't played enough fetch with Prue, you know. So I chastise myself every day because I have to make sure my dogs have a good life.
Think your dogs have a very good life. And as I listen to you describing how you care for them and worry about them and ensure they have the right walks and exercise, etc., I don't think you need to worry. I think your dogs have a very good life. But
No,
your basic point is correct. You know, and we do need to be prepared for allowing our dogs to live a life as a dog. But then the exercise brings us lots of benefits as well. So,
of course.
um,
Well, this is it. We've evolved epigenetically with dogs. I mean, dogs and humans, you know, we breathe the same air for centuries, you know, ate bits of the same food for centuries. There's part of our DNA that I believe is quite similar, you know, and that's where this symbiosis of dogs and people have, you know, developed. That's why dogs are so clever. You know, they know when we're in a good mood, when we're not in a good mood, because they can smell our stress. That's only just been scientifically, you know, concurred. That old adage, dogs can smell fear. Who knew they could all along? And that was just an old adage, you know? It's so interesting. But there's so much more to talk about, Dr. Dan. And I can't wait for you to come back. And thank you so much for this insight today.
No, you're more than welcome. Dogs, just on your smell thing, dogs have somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 times better sense of smell than us. And we're using them now to detect diabetes, obviously to spot epilepsy, even COVID from their smell, as well as all their work on detecting drugs, etc. So dogs are incredible. The next part of this designer journey that we're doing at the Royal Veterinary College is the two ongoing studies on husbandry, so the grooming and behavior in this particular study. And then this study only relates to the three designer breeds that we looked at, so Cavapoos, Cockapoos, and Labradoodles. But in parallel, we have another wonderful researcher, Lizzie Ewings, a vet who is taking a slightly different approach with designer dogs, and she's deliberately starting with a parent breed that is an extreme conformation, so totally different to the current study, GINA study. So Lizzie is starting with pugs, and we're looking at two designer crosses based on pugs, so jogs, so a cross with a Jack Russell Terrier and a pug, and puggles, so a cross with a beagle. So there we're deliberately starting with an extreme conformation parent, and we're looking to see, does the designer cross give us a benefit over the parent breed? And that one, again, it's still designer dogs, but we're looking at a different face of designer dogs. We're looking at how it interacts with extreme conformation, as opposed to the current study that avoided extreme conformation. So when that study comes out, it would be wonderful to come back and chat with you again about that. And I
Yes, I
think that
can't.
will show us that it isn't just designer is just the label over the entire concept of crossing different breeds. But we can't just say because the Cockapoo and the Cavapoo and the Labradoodle are the same health as their parent breeds that applies to every designer, because it probably won't. Just as we see with individual dog breeds, the 223 Kennel Club breeds, that they all differ in their nature, in their health, in their exercise, their longevity. So too will all the different designer breeds. So it's complex, but dogs are just such wonderful animals, and it's such a pleasure and a joy to be doing some work with them and for them.
Yes. Oh no, Dr. Dan. I mean, this is all really good, juicy stuff. So no, I can't wait. I've always wondered about, the puggle, because a pug and a beagle couldn't be more different. But look, what do I know?
It's actually the goal. That's the objective, Anna. So you are deliberately trying, if you have an extreme breed, you're deliberately trying to get something that's very different. So a beagle really is back to our innate health dog. It's in essence, a dog that was bred to work as opposed to be a companion. And we're deliberately trying to see if we outcross in some genes from a dog that has good innate health, that has all the bits a dog should have, will the resultant dog be better in some way, so healthier, physically fitter, than the pug? So it is an interesting question. Ethically, we couldn't do this as a trial where we would deliberately breed these dogs, because that would mean you were deliberately breeding dogs that might not actually be that healthy. But these dogs are out there. There's lots of them in the UK. And Lizzie has just gone out and got some wonderful owners to allow her to come to their houses, play with their dogs, take measurements on their dogs, assess their dog's mentality. And the British public just love their animals. So anyone that wants to come and spend a few hours studying their beautiful puggle or pug or jog, the owners are just saying yes. So it's wonderful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I mean the puggle, I've met quite a few, and they're super little personalities actually, but they would be because they've got two very strong personality parents, arguably, perhaps shouldn't say this, but arguably more than, say, a Labradoodle in a way. I mean, I love the poodle side of the Labradoodle. I mustn't show my bias here, but you know, a pug, I adore their personalities. I know they can't breathe, and I know they can't walk, and I know it's awful, and they run to fat, and it's just awful. And they've got bulgy eyes. But the beagle, yes, it does balance it, but beagles are really naughty, which I love. You know, I love naughty, I love mischievous, I love all of that playfulness. So, and pugs are known as being pugnacious. I think that's where their name came from, actually, from the Hogarth, you know, the painter in the mid 1850s. He was mad about pugs, and he had several, and they were all called Trump. And I think he got some of the ones that came over with the boats from the tea trade. You know, that's how the original Chinese pug got to Britain in the Victorian era, you know. But again, you see, back then, the pug didn't look anything like the pug of today. And in fact, what's so funny is the etchings by William Hogarth of his own pug, Trump, do you know what? It looks like a puggle. So, you know, there you go. I take my hat off. What can I say? The original pugs did look more like a puggle. So there we are. It's all good stuff.
It is all good stuff, and we may well just with these designers just be turning the dial back a little bit, back to where some of these breeds started and arguably should have stayed, rather than moving towards extreme. Certainly in Europe, they call them mopsas, the pugs, but they have a version called a retro mopsa, retro as in backwards, and it really does look like those longer nosed pugs in Hogarth's paintings. So yeah, it's just humans are great. A lot of us are trying to make things better for dogs in the future, and I think we will get there. And podcasts like this will help, Anna. So thank you very much for inviting me along. It's been so wonderful to chat with you, and I look forward to coming back and chatting pugs and puggles and juggles with you in the future.
Can't wait. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Down, for your time today as well.
Thank you.
That's our show, Mr. Binks. What did you think? Yes, I know you are a very fine English toy terrier, and long may that continue. And what's that? Yes, you're right. It is time for Woof of the Week. It's so interesting that designer crossbreeds are now overtaking pedigree dogs in their popularity. But let's remember this, that beauty is always skin deep. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, go on, please rate and review the show wherever you tune into your podcasts. Thanks again to Dr. Dan O Neill for joining us today, and all the links are in the show notes, including to this particular paper. Thanks, of course, to Mike Hansen for all the music and production as ever. Find out more about Mike at Podpeople UK, and check out my Instagram and my website, annaweb.co.uk, to find out a little bit more about myself. What's that, Mr. Binks? Yes, you're right. We will be back in your feed next Sunday. So why don't you subscribe? It's free. That way you'll never miss another show. Bye for now.